Hello folks, Alex here. This is Alex Unabridged, and today it's time for my wrap up for August's adventures in genre, and that was action and adventure. So welcome back, that is the case. Yes, I'm away on holiday at the moment, so my apologies if it's a little echoey. It's quite a high-ceilinged cottage, kind of the sound bouncing around a bit, but we'll see how we can do with it. So it is time for my wrap-up, my very belated wrap-up for August's adventures in genre. Sorry, this is so late coming out. September has been a crazy month. And this is the first time I'm getting a chance to do this, so let's crack on. Yes, it was action and adventure this month, so I picked two books because I also had the mammoth pile of trash that was Garb August to get through in August, so I stuck to two books this month. So the first one then is Trigger Mortis by Anthony Horowitz. Anthony Horowitz's attempt at a James Bond novel, and this picks up straight after Goldfinger, I believe. I haven't read any of the original Fleming novels, by the way, or any other Bond, kind of new Bond stuff, but I do like quite a lot of the movies, so I thought I would give Bond a try, a modern Bond. So yes, this picks up after the events of Goldfinger, and it begins with Bond trying to save the life of a British race car driver who's been targeted by the Soviets' deadly Smersh division. And this leads to a plot against the American space program, eventually. A plot perpetrated by an evil millionaire. You've got to have an evil millionaire, haven't you? And along the way, you know, Bond goes to lavish parties and meets beautiful women, one of which is a woman called Jeopardy Lane, who also has a keen interest in the activities of the book's villain, a man named Jason Sin. So that's the kind of the very basic gist. It is a Bond novel, very much a Bond novel, I believe, a Bond story. So what did I make of it? Not that impressed, I have to say, on this one. This was a 2 out of 5 for me. This was quite meh. It just did not grab me at all. There was a lot of description in this book. It was a little bit over the top, I think, in its description. It was quite hard to kind of keep engaged, keep interested in it because of the endless description. And to be honest, that just kind of made it quite boring. I did find myself, you know, reasonably bored for quite large chunks of this. There is some action in it. There are some decent action sort of set pieces in it, if you like, but not enough for me to kind of keep me thrilled and engaged in the action and adventure. It was just overly descriptive. And it's descriptive of things that I really have no interest in. Cars, you know, weapons, things like that. I'm not interested in the nitty-gritty of stuff like that. For instance, quite a lot of the plot revolves around the threat to this racing driver. And therefore, you know, revolves a lot around car racing, motor racing, a particular sort of, you know, Formula One sort of style motor racing. Around the infamous Nürburgring, and there was a hell of a lot of this in it, and I really don't like motor racing. Motorsports in general, I find them utterly dull. It's just not my cup of tea, and so, you know, that wasn't a good start really for it. But yeah, the amount of description of cars, you know, makes of cars, mechanics, you know, the sort of mechanics, if you like, of driving, things like that, and even down to, you know, what Bond's wearing and things like that. It's just not interesting to me at all. There are some good there are some good moments of writing. It's not badly written, it's just not for me. There are some good moments of good sharp prose and some quite very evocative, kind of sort of darkly poetic writing in parts. And one thing I will say is that, you know, this includes a section which is kind of, it's Fleming's writing. You know, it's a lost manuscript, lost piece, if you like, which has been interwoven into this. And, you know, I don't think you'd necessarily be able to tell where that was. Do you know what I mean? It didn't feel at any point like it suddenly switched voices. I think Horowitz obviously did, you know, good work in tying it in, because nothing ever felt like it suddenly was coming from a different author. So, you know, fair play to that. So I think that's quite difficult to do. But yeah, despite some of the glimpses of sort of quite nice prose, it was never enough to keep me engaged. And it was just quite a chore, this one. I finished it to see what it, you know, to see where it went, but it's left me very cold. And I think part of that is Bond. I like Bond in some iterations, but bear in mind I grew up with the Roger Moore Bond of the sort of the 70s and early 80s. That's what was shown on the TV when I was a kid, and kind of my first Bond, if you like. And when you look back at this, look back at it now, particularly, it's evident that it's far more bonkers. It's almost Austin Powersy. Do you know what I mean? You can see where Austin Powers got a lot of material from when you look at the Roger Moore Bonds. It's ridiculous, a lot of it, and I think that's why I liked it. And I liked, you know, the ridiculousness, the over the top theatrical elements to Pierce Brosnan's Bond in the 90s, very 90s Bond. That was kind of my, you know, sort of teenage years. And I really like the Daniel Craig Bond films. So, you know, I do like Bond in some iterations, but this Bond, if this is close to the original Bond, then yeah, I don't think I'd necessarily get on with Fleming's books. I just found him really dull. He's, you know, he is sexist, he's a misogynist, he's xenophobic, he's arrogant, and, you know, that in itself is always not nice to read. I think, you know, potentially it's toned down somewhat because this is Horowitz writing and not Fleming. So we're looking at writers writing for a different audience, different time, etc. But, you know, this is still Bond in the 50s, so there's still going to be, you know, views from that era, especially towards women. So yeah, and I can deal with a certain amount of sort of sexism and sort of casual racism in stuff, especially when it's written in a different era, when that sort of thing was kind of seen as acceptable, whereas now it's, you know, we know it's not. But that always, even now when I read stuff, as we'll come to in the second book, there has to be something else to the story to make me kind of not forgive it, but be able to kind of like kind of measure it within the whole story. You know, and for this, as I say, there was nothing particularly in the rest of the book that redeemed it for me. So yeah, unfortunately, not one for me. That it may be that I'm just not really a Bond fan in terms of the book Bond, and that actually, you know, my fandom, if you like, or my like, I wouldn't say I'm a super fan. My like for Bond is very much tied to the modern era, you know, and the movie Bond that I like. You know, I like to see the action. I like to see the chases and the fight sequences and all that kind of stuff. And I like to see some of the much stronger female characters coming in as well. So yes, chalk that one up to experience. I'm not in any rush to read any more Bond. But if anybody can recommend any that are, you know, a bit more actiony, bit more of a funny Bond's quippiness. I do like that, whereas kind of didn't come across in this particularly. Do let me know, and I will give another one a try in the future. But for now, not for me. So on to the second one then. This one was Pacific Vortex by Clive Cussler. And this was an audiobook narrated by Scott Brick. And I love Scott Brick's narration. I've got quite a lot in my Audible library that is done by him, and he never fails for me. So yes, Pacific Vortex, I think this was 1983, 1984, something like that. This follows Dirk Pitt. This is the first Dirk Pitt novel by Cussler, who is a death-defying adventurer and a deep-sea expert for the North American Underwater and Marine Agency, a fictional agency made up by Cussler, called, abbreviated to NUMA. So in this one, Pitt discovers a message floating in the sea from a US Navy submarine, which went missing 6 months earlier. The sub was never found, so Pitt takes this information to the Navy. And it seems that many vessels over the past 30 years have disappeared without a trace, kind of inexplicably. In that particular area of the Pacific Ocean, which is kind of a fog-shrouded zone likened to the Bermuda Triangle, and this is the Pacific Vortex. So the Lost Submarine, the Starbuck, is America's deep-diving nuclear arsenal. So there's quite a threat there if somebody was to find the nukes. To threat to the American national defence and to the, a lot of the world, really. So NUMA loans Pitt out to the Navy to go and help them find it and salvage it. But he is pulled into an investigation that turns out to be far more dangerous than anyone expected. So this one then. This one I've given a 3.5 out of 5. And it would be a 4, because I really enjoyed 95% of it. But yes, I have knocked half a point off, basically, for some quite heinous sexism in this. It's not a massive surprise to me in terms of its era and the sort of book that it is. That sort of thing is in there. But yeah, as I say, it's never nice to read particularly. And so yeah, it's kind of there were a couple of bits in this which were way more kind of wince-worthy than anything in the Bond book. But overall, this was far better. So Dirk Pitt then. Pitt is the Bond that I want in a lot of respects. He is a man's man. He is a total arse. He is, as I say, he's sexist. He's xenophobic again. There is some, as I say, there's some casual racism in there. But the difference with Pitt is he's kind of a likeable arse. He's very quippy. The whole thing is very testosterone-y, the whole book. But so much so that it's just funny. Certainly reading it now, it just comes across as almost a parody in places. Pitt is very much a stereotype. He's a caricature, I think. That's how he comes across. And as I say, he's quite Bond-like in a lot of ways, but just way funnier. Although I'm not entirely sure whether he's meant to be or not, what Cussler was intending for this. Whether he meant it to be very tongue-in-cheek and over the top and funny, or whether he was trying to be serious, I have no clue. But it works for me because it comes over as funny in the most part. Pitt doesn't pull any punches, literally and metaphorically. At one point he literally punches a shark in the gills during a fight with a hammerhead. And he wins. He wins the fight with the shark. That's the sort of man he is. The sort of man who can punch a shark in the face and swim away. The story itself is it's really action-oriented. It's quite cheesy. And it's completely over the top in parts. It is ridiculous. I would say this is absolute prime trash. It really is. And maybe that's why I liked it so much. But yeah, it's very over the top, the action, but it's very good. It's really exciting and engaging. It was a thrilling read, and I enjoy a bit of ridiculousness. So it really did keep me hooked. I liked the setting of this one too. It was loads of deep sea stuff, which I've got a bit of a fad for at the moment. It's got a great car chase down the mountains. It's got kind of a good, if not a bit kind of incredulous sort of villain's lair. You've got to have a bit of an over-the-top villain's lair, haven't you? There's not an over-reliance on descriptions in this one either, of the kind of the technical elements of, you know, the submarine engineering and mechanics and all that kind of stuff, or naval procedure or guns or anything like that, which I appreciated. As I say, I'm not interested in that. I don't mind a bit of it to sort of give a bit of flavour, but I don't want too much. But there are some cool gadgets and weapons in this actually as well, which kind of managed to sort of suck me in and make me interested in it. You know, it kind of reminded me a little bit of some of the things I like about some of the Bond films is the bits with Q, the bits with, you know, kind of the fun or silly gadgets, things like that. And there was an element of that to this as well, which I particularly appreciated. And there's quite a good bit of like creepy intrigue to start with as well, until you kind of get a bit more about what is actually going on in the plot here. There's because it's the Pacific Vortex, you know, it's this Bermuda Triangle like mysterious area. You know, there's kind of theories bandied about, things like that are quite eerie, and, you know, kind of it kind of gives you a sense of, you know, the characters thinking, is this supernatural? No, it can't be, you know, but there's always that kind of, ooh, what is it? Because there's some weird things that have been sort of found in you know, past incidents, you know, weird reports of things. So that I really liked that element to it. And there's a really good amount of kind of claustrophobic tension as well built into that. And when Pitt goes and kind of originally finds the sub and the sort of stuff that happens there, and just him kind of, you know, exploring sort of deep sea areas and stuff, there's some real good kind of, you know, tension built in there, almost, you know, kind of very creepy, almost scary. I mean, like, there was a point where I was listening to it late at night and I was a bit like, ooh, I might have to stop listening to this. It's creeping me out a little bit. But you know, just the right amount for me. So yeah, there's, as I say, the action sequences are really well done, and there's a lot of them. It does kind of go from action to action. You know, you're never hoping for necessarily, oh, come on, just get to the next good bit. It's full of that. There is some there's some quite visceral sections in terms of, you know, sort of the violence within the fight sequences, action sequences. But they're really well described, and they're kind of, again, they're trashy in that respect, and it's never too much. It never feels like it goes too far with the violence. So, negatives. The main one, as I've already said, is the misogynistic kind of attitudes of Pitt, and the casual racism that comes in very occasionally, but it is there. Yeah, Pitt's treatment of women as a character generally is terrible, and the writing of female characters leaves a hell of a lot to be desired. They are one tone, basically. They are objects. There's no strong female characters in it whatsoever. They are, you know, they are objects for Pitt to ogle or save or what have you. There is a romance in the book, but it's laughable to even describe it as that. It really is ridiculous in terms of to call it a romance. And the dialogue between Pitt and pretty much any female character in it, not that there are loads of them, but, you know, there are a few, a couple of sort of more major ones. Yeah, the dialogue between Pitt and those characters is like 99% cringe. So that's the kind of major downside to it for me. The only other thing I'll say about it is that there is a scene towards the end of the book when you get into that kind of point where, you know, you're finding out, you know, what the villain's been doing, how they've been doing it, why they've been doing it, all that kind of stuff. All of that is essentially kind of just info dumped in like one chapter, and it's just a lot of information just to kind of go, bosh, here you go, here's the whys and wherefores. So it did feel quite full on. It's like it could have been peppered throughout a little bit more. It could have been foreshadowed. It could have been, you get a lot of kind of sort of intimations that Pitt knows more than he's letting on. And even though it's being told through kind of Pitt's perspective, you as the reader never really get in on those things. So you know that Pitt's holding something back, but you never know what it is until it all comes out in this massive info dump in this conversation between him and the villain towards the end. Unfortunately, the writing is good enough that, as I say, Pitt's quippy, he's a fun character, and the villain is, quite stereotypically villainous as well in a lot of ways. So the dialogue it's quite fun and it works okay. But there is just, as I say, just the amount of like info dumping in that scene. I just kind of went, blimey, you really have just waited until the end just to tell us everything. But as I say, it didn't bore me. It was a little niggle. It could have been peppered throughout a little bit better. So the conclusion on that one is I really, really enjoyed that, apart from the sexism, really, and as I say, and the bits of other xenophobia, casual racism, stuff like that in it. I can't forgive that, but I'm not going to let it, as I say, it was such small amounts in the whole scheme of things that I'm not going to let it ruin the book. But yeah, it was just pure, unadulterated, suspend your disbelief, trashy fun, really. I am going to definitely keep reading the Dirk Pitt novels, actually. As I say, 95% of this was really good fun. And so I think I'll save them for some trashy reading events, perhaps, in the future. There are over like 20 of them in the series. So I've got plenty more trashy reads to look forward to. And just reading around from what other people have said about the later books, or, the more of the books in the series, Pitt's not quite so much of an arse in all of them. So that bodes well. But yeah, as I say, I didn't expect to necessarily like this. And actually I did. So action and adventure in general then. Will I continue? Will I read more action and adventure? Well, yes, definitely. But I think the thing for me with action and adventure that I've kind of learned is it needs to be trashy. I read a bit of action and adventure for Garb August. I read an Executioner book by Don Pendleton, Assault on Soho. That I really enjoyed, even though I didn't think I would, because it was trashy, and it was just good fun. And the same goes for Pacific Vortex. It's trashy, and therefore it is fun. It's rip-roaring adventure, and you kind of, you're not expecting anything serious. In fact, I don't want anything serious. I just want silly, trashy fun, and that's what I got with that. Whereas the Bond novel, maybe it's the spy type of thing that I'm just not into. I don't know. I'd have to try some more spy books that weren't Bond, perhaps, to see what I thought of that side of things. But yeah, I'm just not as interested in anything that's kind of trying to be a bit more serious with action and adventure. I think I like it really. It's like when I watch, put it like this, when I watch movies, action and adventure movies, I want the silly ones. I want Dwayne Johnson, and Skyscraper, or Duct Tape, as we call it in my house, or, San Andreas, things like that. Silly action films which really don't take themselves seriously. That's what I'm after when I go for action and adventure. So, and I think the same goes for books. So I'm going to try some more trashy action and adventure in the future. I want more, punching of sharks. I'm classy, yes, I know. But yeah, I want the trashy stuff. I want the fun stuff. So that is it for August's Adventures in Genre. September's Adventures in Genre, well, seeing as we're nearly at the end of September, you will be getting that probably next week. And September has been a month of sci-fi, lots of sci-fi. I won't go through what I've been reading here. I have got a TBR out for September if you want to check out what I've been up to. But you could also just wait for a week and I will have the Adventures in Genre conclusion for September out probably next weekend. So yes, so that is it from me today. Thank you very much for watching, folks. If you've read either of the books I've talked about today, please do let me know your thoughts in the comments, as always. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving me a like and subscribing for more content coming very soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.